All right, if you could take your seats, we'd like to get started. All right, one more time. We'd like you to take your seats. We'd like to get started, please. All right, thank you. Good evening and welcome once again. It's been just over 28 months since the explosion and fire. We have all been through quite a bit. As a neighborhood, the difficulty in rebuilding lives and spirits and the realization that everything will never be the same again. But there's also the joy associated with the rebuild in seeing beautiful new homes and the smiles and the warmth they have blessed us all with. As a city, we have immersed ourselves in the unknown territory of national, state, and local dialogue, debate, and deliberation. It's new for us in its unprecedented discussion of this event and its aftermath. We have tried so very hard, to represent you in the manner you rightfully deserve and are committed to continue that representation. As the community that we are, the San Bruno family, I want you to recall that first Saturday afternoon at St. Robert's Church, less than 48 hours after the explosion and fire. I told you then that we didn't have all the answers, but we would get them, and that we would stand side by side with you through this ordeal. Our resolve couldn't be stronger to continue that commitment. And now for this evening's community meeting. I want to first address, because I think it might come up, the not-for-profit. We will only briefly be discussing the restitution fund this evening. A separate direct discussion on the formation of the not-for-profit will occur Tuesday, February 5th, right here at the Senior Center. First of all, I would like to ask the consultants, department heads, and city officials to stand, please. We are joined this evening by the entire San Bruno City Council, Vice Mayor O'Connell, Councilmember Salazar, Councilmember Medina, and Councilmember Ibarra. Thank you very much. Our presentation this evening is scheduled to last about 40 to 45 minutes. I will now introduce our city manager, Connie Jackson, and our consultant, Harry Burrows, who will be addressing you on the 5 following topics: the City of San Bruno's Community Restitution Fund, the neighborhood rebuilding efforts, the infrastructure reconstruction update, the status of PG&E projects within the community and the entire city, and the city involvement in the California Public Utilities Commission, the CPUC, proceedings. And as always, we seek comments from the community. So just as we did the last number of times, comment cards are available. Just put your hand up, they'll bring you a pen and a comment card, and staff will be by to pick them up. For those unable to attend this evening, the meeting is being recorded and will air on Channel 1 during the upcoming weeks. We will also be available on the city website. So to get this going, I would like to introduce City Manager Connie Jackson.
Thank you very much. We're very pleased to have so many people here tonight. We realize that it's dark and it's cold and it's rainy outside, so we appreciate you coming out so that we can address some of the important topics that we've been hearing about over the last weeks and months. And as the mayor said, it's our intent tonight to address as many and all, hopefully, of the questions and issues that might be on your mind. We've tried to prepare based on we have prepared based on the information that we have heard being discussed within the community. And so our presentation tonight will cover those topics in the hope of covering issues and topics that you are perhaps most concerned about, but it is in no way our intent to limit the issues that you may want to bring to our attention. And as the mayor said, we will get you the answers. We will do what we need to do in order to address them if we're not able to do that tonight. First topic that I wanted to make some comments about is having to do with money. As I think everybody is aware, the city has successfully negotiated with PG&E in two areas to achieve a substantial sum of funds to do two different things within the community. The graphic on the slide, on the screen here, attempts to distinguish and to clarify what those monies are for, how much they are, and how they're being used. The first is what we're calling the Crestmore Trust Fund. This was established by agreement between the city, at the city's initiation, and PG&E. The city negotiated for up to $50 million to be made available to cover the city's costs on a reimbursement basis associated with the disaster response and recovery, as well as the infrastructure replacement, reconstruction, and improvement of the neighborhood. The fund was established with an initial $12 million deposit, and as of this date, the city has received reimbursement of $6.1 million in cost. Those costs have been expended for construction projects, for consultant and staff time associated directly with the recovery and the response efforts, and for a variety of activities associated with arising from and because of the disaster. All of these costs are beyond those that would normally be the expectation of the city's normal operations and normally budgeted. At the current time, we have approximately $5 million in outstanding costs, including a substantial amount of staff time that has not yet been recovered from the trust fund. Approximately a total of $5 million pending a reimbursement request that will be submitted to the trustee who is responsible for disbursement of the funds within the next 30 days. That will bring us to an amount that will trigger the need to seek replenishment of the deposited amount, and we will be working with PG&E and our trustee to see to it that that happens so that funds remain available to the city on an ongoing basis to cover what is and will continue to be a very, very substantial cost associated with the many activities that are being undertaken. The next topic, and I think this is one Zamira alluded to, that we know that residents of the community and of your neighborhood are particularly interested in, and that is the restitution fund that the city negotiated with PG&E approximately 10 months ago. Again, the city initiated and worked aggressively to make sure that funds were available to address the damage that has occurred to this community community-wide, beyond the neighborhood, beyond the physical damage that has occurred, and that goes to the sense of security, the sense of identity, and the well-being of the San Bruno community overall. The amount that was negotiated was $68.75 million in cash and 5 of the now vacant lots, which have been deeded to the city. The restitution funds in the amount of $68.75 million have been received by the city, and they've been deposited for safekeeping to an account where they're invested in U.S. Treasuries in order to protect the principal amount of those funds until that amount of money can be turned over to a not-for-profit entity which the settlement agreement requires the City Council to establish. That not-for-profit entity is intended specifically to be separate from the City of San Bruno and managed independently in order that the funds are managed and distributed, dispersed, used for the benefit of the community as a whole and for the purposes that were the subject of the negotiations. Again, the agreement specifically calls for those funds to be managed and put into the hands of a not-for-profit entity. That entity has not yet been set up and is in process through the decision-making of the City Council. As the mayor indicated, there will be a meeting on February 5th, at which time the City Council will conduct a study session to discuss issues related to the formation of that not-for-profit. We currently expect, and the City Council and I understand clearly, the urgency of getting that work done, getting the not-for-profit set up, and allowing it to begin its important task of determining how those funds should be used. We expect that within the next 60 days, we will be in a position to begin the actual incorporation and formation of the not-for-profit entity, and within the short period of time, and I realize short is relative, but within the next several months after the formation, the initial establishment of the not-for-profit, that entity will be prepared to begin outreach to the public, hearing from you and others within the community and talking about specifics having to do with the use of the funds. At this point, I expect that will occur sometime this summer in the July to August time period. The City Council has very specifically identified as part of their preliminary consideration of setting up this not-for-profit that public participation, extensive outreach, and an opportunity for engagement by anybody and everybody within the community who has an interest is the high priority for the work effort that this not-for-profit will undertake. Again, the city as a entity itself does not control and will not control the funds. There was a very specific discussion at the negotiations where the not-for-profit was intended to specifically make sure that the funds are not commingled with other city operating funds or used for purposes that might be considered normal governmental activities. 5 lots were also part of that settlement. I'm going to ask Harry Burrows to address the lots more specifically in his comments. I know from conversations with some of you that this is an important topic, and I can assure you as well that the City Council is moving forward quickly to make sure that we have a broad-based discussion and address the various interests that may be relevant to the use of those lots, the potential sale or transfer of those lots, and ultimately, we hope, the development of at least several of those lots. The city's interest in acquiring the lots through the negotiations, and again, drawback in memory to approximately a year ago, where PG&E's activity in the neighborhood and the decision-making about what people were intending to do with their properties was still at a much earlier stage than it is now. The city was interested in making sure that there was a thoughtful consideration of how lots that are not being developed by their owners are handled in order to make sure that the neighborhood is rebuilt in the manner that you want it rebuilt. And secondly, we believe that there may be, and we believed at that time, that there may be an opportunity to consider some public purpose from one or more of those lots. And as Harry will point out to you, we think that is still the case with at least one and maybe a couple of the lots that are in city ownership. As to the value of those lots, the assigned value was $250,000 per lot. Those lots have been deeded to ownership by the city of San Bruno. There has been no profit or value received, monetary value received on those lots. However, it is our expectation that if one or more of those lots is sold and there is a monetary value derived from those lots, that those monies would become the property of the not-for-profit entity and would increase the value of the settlement funds that are subject to the not-for-profit's decision-making. So with that, I'm going to ask Harry to step forward to continue the discussion about the lots and then move forward with a number of other topics.
Thank you, Connie. For those of you that don't know me, I'm Harry Burrows, and I'm the city's project manager for the rebuilding of the Crestmore neighborhood. As some of you that do know me know that I can talk about infrastructure for a long time. I'm going to try not to bore you a lot here this evening. So I'm going to try to go through the topics and hit the highlights. But as Connie said, please feel free to ask questions at the end of the discussion. So jumping right in, I thought I'd give a brief update on the rebuilding status in the neighborhood. I know some of you have seen this exhibit that was posted in the back of the room here before the meeting. Quick summary of the 38 homes that were destroyed. 14 have been rebuilt and are reoccupied. 7 of them are either have the building permits issued, are in construction, or have permits that are pending. And that leaves 16 in the to be determined category. And of those 16, there's 5 that are city owned. They're the ones that are shown in red on this exhibit. There's 7 that are under PG&E control, 5 of them that PG&E has purchased, and 2 of them that are in escrow to PG&E. One certainly in escrow. One, I've been told, is if it's not in escrow as we speak, will be in escrow within days. And then that leaves 4 in private ownership. So in terms of the lots, as Connie indicated, we know that there's been a great deal of interest and concern over the timing of the rebuilding of the lots. One of the major things that I've heard a lot of you share with us is, we understand that you're going to be tearing up our neighborhood for another year and a half or so with the infrastructure. When that's done, we'd like to see those lots built. We don't want to wait another year or 2 afterwards to have those lots built. We don't want to be living in a construction zone forever, and we recognize that. We're in a better position today, I think, globally to move forward, and that's based on a couple different things. One is that PG&E has now, our understanding, settled with the last of the properties, so they've purchased or have in escrow all of the homes or all of the lots that they are planning or considering to purchase. The other thing is, as Connie indicated, and I'll get into it a little bit later in the discussion, particularly in this intersection here at Glenview and Earl, part of what we're planning is some streetscape and traffic calming improvements, and the design of those potentially have some impacts on the adjacent lots. We think we've got, our engineer has a design now that'll work, that'll minimize the impacts to those lots. So it's not a question now of whether we're going to need those lots to accommodate these potential streetscape improvements or not. We have that answer. So we have developed some options that we will be taking to the City Council for their consideration in terms of the disposition of the lots, both the city lots as well as PG&E's lots. PG&E has stated, and they've acted on this or not acted on this, as the case may be, that they're not going to do anything with their lots. They're going to wait and take the direction from the city, and that's at the city's request. So, like I said, we'll be presenting some options to the council in February. We anticipate that the council will give some direction back to us, and that at the latest, by the end of March, we should have some clarity and direction on how we're going to proceed with both the city-owned and the PG&E-owned lots. And sort of a segue off of that, as Connie alluded to, there's been some discussion about the potential for some of the lots being used for public purpose. And in particular, what we're referring to is the City Council has, from day one, committed to rebuilding the Glenview Earl Park that used to be, here at the top of the canyon. Obviously, there's an opportunity now with city-owned lot here and the potential for maybe some of the privately owned lots adjacent to it that are not going to rebuild to be part of that future public space. So that process, we're now at a point where we can proceed with what we're calling park visioning. The park visioning process, we will be bringing in an outside consultant as a facilitator to help with a collaborative discussion with the neighborhood. We're anticipating that that process will start as early as the third week of February. We've got some tentative dates that we've discussed. You'll see a notice coming out, and we hopefully will get a lot of participation from the neighborhood as part of the park visioning. And we know there's many different thoughts out there. Part of this process is to help define and refine that vision for the park. And then the last aspect of the park is, I think we'd previously discussed in some of our meetings the replanting of the canyon. And we had a project ready to go out to bid here about a month and a half ago. For several different reasons, we put that project on hold, one of which is the recent project that we did with the infrastructure. We replaced a storm drain down the canyon. So that we had to have that project finished before we could get in there and do the replanting. The idea now is that with the park process kicking off, if we can dovetail the replanting of the canyon with that park construction, it would probably make for a much better project. So that's what our current thoughts are on that. Let me jump in and briefly talk about the projects that have been completed to date, and I won't spend a whole lot of time on this, but we did a little sewer project here about a year ago to upsize a piece of sewer that was undersized. We had the opportunity to do that while there were no homes on above that sewer line. We also completed water line improvements up along Sneath that involved the installation of pressure regulating stations that will help with the reliability and pressure of water within this neighborhood, especially in the event of any loss of pressure within the neighborhood system. And then obviously what we called our phase 2 construction, which is this area here, and that was the replacement of all of the utilities, underground utilities, within the fire damaged area. And that's been a project that we understand has been very disruptive to the community, created a lot of dust, noise, and some other issues. The project on the plus side did replace the water lines. We have new upsized water lines, new sewer lines, new sewer laterals to the homes, and new water services. The paving of the roads, I know, is a question that has come up. The intent of that project was never to repave the roads as part of the utility replacement. It was to do the patch paving and wait and do the overall paving of all the streets at the very end of the project when we finish the future phases of utility construction. We acknowledge that we may need to revisit that plan, and we're having discussions. We may do some additional temporary paving out there to help in the interim until the ultimate project is done. So the next project is what we're calling our Phase 3 project. We're ready to go out to bid with that. We anticipate advertising February 8th. We're going to open bids in March and take the bids to the City Council for award in late March, with construction start mid-April, coinciding with the end of the rainy season. It's a very extensive project. It involves the utility replacement in the remainder of the neighborhood. So again, sewer lines, water lines, sewer laterals to the homes, cleanouts, water services, as well as some storm drainage. It is a big project. We anticipate that construction will be completed November, so it's going to be an April to November construction time frame. We obviously, again, recognize the disruption that it is going to have to the neighborhood. We have learned some lessons from the Phase 2 project, where hopefully we'll, resolve some of the issues and problems that we had in this project. Unfortunately, we do have to go through a public bid process. We don't have the luxury of just going out and selecting a contractor. We're bound by the public contract code. But having said that, there's certain things that we can do and have done within our contract documents and specifications to ensure that some of the issues that we had will not happen, or if they do, will be much lesser in intensity in this project. You know, some of those are things like the additional requirements for street sweeping, and we're not using native material, so we're not going to have a lot of dirt taken out of the trench and put on the street. That created a lot of the dust issues. So, you know, those sort of issues we're dealing with. The other aspect is the phasing of the work. We're going to hold the contractor to some pretty tight phasing of the work. Contractor, normally what he would want to do on a project like this is he has a sewer crew. He'd like to go through the whole neighborhood and do all the sewers at once, come behind and do the water lines and then the storm drain. What we're going to make him do is we're going to segregate out into phases and only disrupt a smaller portion of the neighborhood at once. That will hopefully accomplish a couple different things. One, it'll avoid the whole neighborhood being torn up. It'll also, keep access through the neighborhood at all times. So, for example, in this red phase up here, if that's under construction, traffic will still be able to move through Glenview and Earl and Claremont fairly easily through the neighborhood. And that was the thinking behind each of these phases, is for each one, we'll be able to control the contractor's activities a little bit better. Then after this project, again, this project should be done about the end of the year, hopefully November. The next phase is what we call the surface improvements, and this is essentially everything above ground that you can see. That'll include sidewalk replacement, repaving of the streets, street light replacement, and the streetscape and traffic calming. And I know some of those are shown here in the back of the room, and I'll get to that briefly here in a second. As far as the street lights are concerned, we are in design right now for a street light pilot program. And what that is going to entail is we are actually going to go out primarily on Earl, and up in this area we're going to replace some of the existing street lights with LEDs and some induction lights so that we can see what those look like. And then down at the lower end of Earl, in this area, we're going to do a pilot program with shorter, 16-foot tall, what they call acorn top decorative lights. So instead of the standard street lights that have the poles with the arms that reach out, these are the shorter decorative ones. We wanted to explore that from both an aesthetic viewpoint as well as a lighting standpoint within the neighborhood. So that pilot program will get constructed. We can walk it, everyone can walk it, you can drive it, you can give us feedback on what you think. We're really interested in what the community would like to see out there. The schedule for the surface improvements, the repaving project, which again includes some of these streetscape enhancements that I'll get to in a second. We'd like to put that into construction. If we can dovetail it immediately at the end of the Phase 3 project, great. If not, it'll fall into the first quarter of 2014, and hopefully by late summer of 2014, we'll have that work completed. So those red dots are just meant to be illustrations of streetlights, of streetlight locations. They're not literal. Those aren't exactly where they will be. Yeah. So let me talk real briefly about the intersection improvements and the streetscape improvements. Again, the purpose of these is both aesthetic as well as traffic calming, and traffic calming is really just a fancy engineering planning word for, helping to control the speed of traffic through the neighborhood. We've had several meetings with some of the directly affected residents where these improvements are proposed and gotten some good feedback. The next step and our intent is to hold block by block meetings with residents so that we can get feedback from each specific area. We know that some people, the feedback we've gotten is some people like these improvements, others have some big concerns, and we want to hear those concerns. Nothing has been decided. These are just ideas. We initially had concentrated on the Glenview corridor with these traffic calming and streetscape improvements. We thought we had the opportunity to spread that through the rest of the neighborhood, take a look at the remaining intersections, if there's things we can do like enhanced paving and some additional landscaping in some of these curb bulb outs. Great. Again, nothing has been decided. We want feedback on this. In terms of speeding, I've mentioned it a couple times here. We know that speeding through the neighborhood is an issue, like it is in every neighborhood. Obviously, with some of the wide open spaces, it may be a little bit worse in this neighborhood. I've seen it firsthand on many occasions. I know the majority of the folks in the room have as well. Some of the steps that we're taking in the immediate future include, we have just ordered, and Ron will be very happy to hear this, that we will be installing within the next week by city crews 2 radar speed indicators on Glenview Drive. Those are the signs that go right below the speed limit signs that flash your speed, so it gives feedback. They're pretty effective in both educating folks on how fast they're driving and actually slowing people down. So those will get installed here shortly. They are portable. Once Glenview is improved, we can actually move those to other portions of the neighborhood or other portions of the city, as the case may be. The other thing that we're doing is, I don't know how many of you noticed, there's only 2 speed limit signs within the neighborhood. We're going to be installing additional speed limit signs before, as part of this work, before any of the ultimate improvements are done. Just again, as a reminder to everyone what the speed limit is in the neighborhood. And then lastly, we have, the police department has a community service officer who has been assigned in the neighborhood for a portion of his weekly time. Some of you may have seen the CSO up in the neighborhood. I know I have. Hopefully that will be a deterrent to the speeding as well. So that's it for the overview for the infrastructure improvements. Wanted to touch base real quick on the PG&E Line 132 status. That question has come up in some of my discussions with the public in the past several months. In particular, a question has occurred, what is the status of the filling of the pipe? So a portion of the pipe, Line 132, has been filled, the portion here in orange and the portion in blue. And the blue portion is the old 1948 pipe that was buried real deep. Those 2 sections have been filled with the cement slurry. The remaining sections in yellow have not been filled yet. So based upon concerns from the City Council as well as the residents, PG&E was asked to test the pipe, test the metallurgy of the pipe, as well as any residual materials that are inside the pipe. For the portions that have been filled, those tests came back negative. They were filled. The remaining portions of the pipe, the tests have also come back negative, but it gets into a little bit of a complication that I don't want to go into too much detail, but it's testing protocol. And they literally go in the pipe and they scrape off the residue, and then they test that residue. That has come back negative. The protocol says that they need to then take that material and put it in liquid and do some additional tests to essentially verify the first test. They don't have enough scrapings out of the pipe. So logic would tell you if there's not enough scrapings, and the scrapings that they had were negative, that there's really not an issue with the contamination. But erring on the side of caution, PG&E is in discussions with not only the State Department of Toxic Control Substances, but also with some independent third-party testing labs, because this is going to set a precedent for how pipelines are abandoned. So we don't have an answer back yet specifically on the timing of when the remaining portions will be filled, but it is being worked on, and it will be filled. The second aspect of that is the testing of the soils around the pipe. So on this map here, the red dots indicate locations where soil tests were taken in November of last year. They were sent off to an independent lab. The lab is still testing them. I did hear from PG&E actually today in advance of this meeting that they pushed the lab at our request to at least get some information that we could share with you today. The test results that they've done so far are negative. There's no hazardous materials that they've found in the soils. We're expecting to get the final report by the end of January. So we'll confirm that. We're also planning on sending it out to a separate peer review on behalf of the city. And then the last part of the soil testing is there has been some concern that was raised by residents as to the amount of dust in the neighborhood, particularly during the last summer and fall when it was dry. And the question that came up was, is any of the dust in the air coming off the vacant lots? Can we retest what's on those vacant lots and just verify that there's nothing in those soils that are hazardous? The City Council approved a contract with the firm to do that in I believe it was in October actually. We have not done that yet because it started raining and there's no dust in the air. So we're going to wait until it gets dry again so that we can go out there and do that testing. But the consultant is standing by and ready to perform that work. Then I wanted to talk briefly about some of the work that PG&E is doing, not only within the neighborhood, but citywide. So the city staff meets with PG&E on a weekly basis and takes a very active role in the activities that they perform within the city. PG&E is undertaking a huge reliability upgrade within all of their system. They're focusing right now on the peninsula, and part of the reliability upgrade involves the replacement of switches, connectors, poles, remote sensing and monitoring equipment, and substation modernization. All of that work is occurring within the city now and has been for the last 6 months or so, and will continue for the next, I believe, 12 to 18 months or so. There's actually one of the exhibits in the back of the room that outlines some of that work in the different areas of town. The work also includes vegetation management, and vegetation management is a fancy word for trimming trees. Going in, trimming the trees back where they have the potential to limbs to fall during windstorms and other things to knock down the lines and cause power outages. So that work is occurring and has been occurring in town. The work specifically related to the Crestmore neighborhood, bulk of that is scheduled for the third quarter of this year, which is July, August, September. So that's when we'll be seeing a lot of that work occurring in the Crestmore neighborhood. The other thing that they've been doing is some gas line surveys for leaks. They've got sniffers out on a regular basis. They've also done a corrosion leak survey of 1,200 homes within the city, where they go out and check the meters and the connections to the meters to see if they've corroded. Luckily for us, all of those have come back with 0 leaks. The additional work that is planned includes what they're calling pig launchers, pig launcher facility at the Healy Station. That's work that we just found out about here about a week or so ago. And what that entails is some construction work at that Healy Station that will allow PG&E to put smart pigs, these machines that go in the lines and go up and down the line to determine is there corrosion, are there leaks, how are the welds, all of those things. So that work will be occurring at the Healy Station in roughly the May-June time frame of this year. Lastly, there's a project that I know a lot of folks in this room are aware of, and that's the Sneath Lane pipeline replacement. Sneath Lane, if you've driven on it lately, has construction going on. There's some plates out there. There's some uneven asphalt. The intent from the beginning was for PG&E to get in there and replace an existing 4-inch gas line with a new 6-inch gas line. They were planning on doing it with directional boring, which means digging small holes and then drilling and sliding the pipe in there for long lengths so we don't have open cutting in the road. Unfortunately, PG&E's encountered some unexpected utilities within the roadway. A lot of those utilities are city utilities. For those of you that have lived here many years may know that Sneath used to be a 2-lane road. It wound around a lot. The water lines and some of the storm drain lines followed the old alignment. And so what we thought was out there in its supposed location, it's in a different location. So what PG&E has done is they've stopped that construction project, and they're in the process of filling those holes where the plates are, and they're going to repave those. In the interim, they're going to be doing some investigative work, finding out exactly where all these utilities are. Then they're going to reassess their plan. Hopefully they can come back and still do the directional boring without doing open cutting. There may be areas where they have to trench within the road. So that explains some of the activity that's happening out there on Sneath Lane. And with that, hopefully I haven't bored you too much. I'm going to turn it back over to Connie to talk a little bit about the CPUC proceedings.
So we've started to receive some of your questions, and as soon as I'm finished in just a moment, we'll begin answering those questions. But I would encourage you, even if you've heard what we've said and we haven't answered your question, please jot it down for us, and we'll either try and get you the information in another way or answer the question more completely. The last little topic that we wanted to cover tonight is what else is the city doing and why is it doing it, related to the aftermath and the continuing ramifications of the disaster that you all experienced in your neighborhood. The mayor spoke earlier in his comments to the unprecedented nature of the tragedy that occurred in San Bruno, in your neighborhood, and the effect that that has had on people throughout our nation in recognizing that perhaps the safety of the utility systems that run under our streets is no longer something that we can take for granted. The city has been called upon over and over again over this past 2.5 years to represent what happened here and what the ramifications of that are for people everywhere. And in particular, we've been called upon to advocate or to be a representative and to express our opinion about the necessary improvements that need to be made in order to assure your safety and the safety of others throughout the United States, to make sure that something like what happened here can't ever happen again. Unfortunately, as you know, it keeps happening. The first year after the disaster here in San Bruno, a team of city staff was devoted devoted a majority of our time, literally on an all-day, everyday basis, to supporting and assisting with the completion of the NTSB investigation. And as you know, in August, at the end of August in 2011, the NTSB rendered a conclusive and comprehensive report that identified the many different failures that had contributed to the tragedy that happened here. Over the course of that year, I personally made 6 trips to Washington, D.C., and among the city council and the city staff that were involved, again, on an everyday basis, we made over 30 trips to Washington, D.C. at the request of the federal agencies to assist with the various investigations. That report concluded, the NTSB's report concluded with 29 safety recommendations. Actually, before the report was completed, there were an additional 10 urgent safety recommendations. This is, I believe, also an unprecedented number, a total of 39 recommendations for improvements that needed to be made arising out of what happened in your neighborhood. Many of these recommendations were to PG&E itself. Most of the recommendations, however, were to the federal and state agencies that are responsible for oversight and regulation of gas utility systems and their operations. Many of those recommendations remain not yet fully implemented 2.5 years later. It's a complicated issue. Many of them will not be fully implemented for some time to come. But it is the interest and a significant continuing work effort of the City of San Bruno to assure that advocacy is provided and representation is provided, to make sure that what happened here is not forgotten in terms of the necessary safety improvements and the necessary regulatory improvements. And to that end, since the completion of the NTSB report and investigation, the city has, for the last 1.5 years, devoted itself on a continuing basis to participating as a party to the ongoing investigation and regulatory proceedings that are continuing through the California Public Utilities Commission. The purpose of that activity and those proceedings has three general intended outcomes. One is to assess penalty fines that will be levied against PG&E. The amount of those fines is as yet undetermined, and what is clear is that those amounts, by law, are directed and dedicated directly to the general fund of the state of California. They will not be available to improve regulations or the implementation of regulatory oversight through the California Public Utilities Commission or for any other purpose. They go directly into the state's general fund. Nevertheless, it is the city's interest and its advocacy to see to it that those penalty fines are sufficiently high to be commensurate with the severity and the impact of the disaster that occurred in our community. The proceedings are also expected to develop and implement new regulations that will be imposed upon PG&E as well as the other utility operators throughout the state of California, and more specifically to define specific improvements that are necessary to PG&E's system, its physical system, and its operations to make sure that the system is capable, safe, and sound. The city has experienced a great deal of concern about the way that utility oversight is provided in our state, and we have continued, as I said, to be a participant at the table with the intent of reform and safety. I wish I could tell you tonight that I see those agendas being shared broadly. That is not yet the case. And to the extent that any of you are interested in learning more about that, we would be happy to provide information or to assist you in becoming more aware and informed and potentially active in what we consider to be important issues for our community and for citizens of our state. That concludes the formal comments that we intended to provide tonight based on many of the things that we've heard from you and from your neighbors over the course of the last many months since we last had one of these general meetings. We have a number of questions that have already been submitted, and I think what we would like to do now is to move towards answering those questions and then encouraging you to continue to provide those questions so that we can deal with as many of them as we can possibly tonight. And I will start. Do you want to read the questions?
Okay, I'll read the first one. Let me see. A year ago, meeting at Highlands, you promised us an accounting of monies. We're still waiting for that accounting. We were told it would be available on city site.
So, it is on the city site, and I'm sorry to tell you that I had a hard time finding it today. So that's going to be corrected. There is an accounting of the amounts that have been reimbursed to the city from the trust fund, the $50 million amount that was established in order to cover the city's costs. That amount, as I said, was $6.1 million to date. It is detailed in on a page on the city's website that you can reach by doing what? Can somebody tell me, remind me? So on the city's website, there is a tab in the upper left-hand corner that says Crestmore Glenview Fire, and on that page, it's on the reconstruction tab on the left. Click on the reconstruction tab, and this accounting is in the section on reconstruction. And what I'm going to do tomorrow is have somebody move that to the front page so that there's a direct link off of the front page to that accounting, and I hope that will make it easier for you to find it. That's updated on a regular basis. Reimbursements from the trust fund happen only about every 4 to 6 months. So it's information that is not updated frequently, but is updated every time there's a reimbursement.
All right, next question is, why does the city insist on charging the residents of Crestmore 2 for the increased water rate when PG&E gave you $50 million to replace everything, sidewalks, streets, lighting, water, etc.? You also received $70 million for all of the city.
The city council has evaluated in the rate study that we did a year ago a 10-year program for improvement of the water and sewer systems citywide. There is a very high price tag associated with the capital improvements that need to be done to situate that system, to replace and rehabilitate those systems for their ongoing capability and reliability. Among the improvements that are being made in your neighborhood and that we hope to provide going forward may be some projects that would overlap with that 10-year program for upgrade of the entire system. To the extent that that happens, there could, and those projects are funded via the trust fund, there could be a reduction in the total cost of the sewer and water system rehabilitation program. The cost of the program overall is distributed across all of the users of the system. So to the extent that there may be a reduction in the total cost of the program, that would hopefully find its way into a small reduction in the cost that ratepayers are charged. Now, I realize I haven't actually specifically addressed the question, which is, why can't my rates, because I live in this neighborhood and you're doing improvements in this neighborhood, why can't my rates be less? And that's a matter of overall system-wide management and equity among individuals who are paying rates within the city. The law requires that the city use a fair and system-wide analysis in order to assign costs associated with the use and demand on the system. And that's what the City Council has done. So while I realize that that may not be the answer that you would like to hear, that is the analysis that the city uses, and it's the best answer that I can provide. Yes, sir. Right, yeah, I understand that. I understand that. The costs that are being covered by the trust fund will offset the total cost of the improvements that need to be made system-wide. So the cost of the cost to ratepayers will be proportionally, but probably not much, reduced. And I understand that that reduction is shared by everybody in the city, as are the costs for improvements that are happening throughout the city. I understand. Please.
Well, let me just add to that, and it's not going to probably satisfy you, but a lot of the infrastructure, all of the infrastructure in your particular neighborhood will be completely replaced. But you still use the sewer treatment plant that we all use. You still use all of the sewer and water lines downstream that we all use. So it's not just the replacement of one particular neighborhood or entity. If in fact there's a savings down the road, there's nothing preventing the city council from reducing those rates for everyone. But it would be very difficult for us to try to segregate out one entity of the city.
So we have another question. Is any of the settlement money received from PG&E going to the education fund to help with education? It's my understanding that the property taxes received from homeowners pay for education in San Bruno, and with the decreased property values because of the San Bruno explosion, would the education fund be entitled to receive a portion of the settlement? Again, the settlement funds will be distributed. Decision-making about the use of the settlement funds will be made by a not-for-profit entity that is separate from the city. It's not, there have been no decisions, and whether the not-for-profit entity would determine that some amount or any of the funds should be used for educational purposes, that would be a decision that would be made through the process that I described earlier. I will say one thing, and that is that there was a very specific negotiation that occurred to result in a $68.75 million settlement, and a strongly held interest on the part of PG&E, as expressed during those negotiations, was that funds provided were not used for normal governmental purposes, and that they were deliberately and distinctly separated from any possible use for normal operations. That's the purpose of the not-for-profit entity, or among the purposes of the not-for-profit entity. My opinion, it would not be consistent with the terms and the requirements of the settlement agreement for operations, normal governmental or normal business operations of another entity that's funded by taxpayer revenues to be covered by settlement funds. But again, that's a decision that I'm not making, the City Council is not making, it would be made by the not-for-profit.
Okay, I'm just going to read the questions myself and then provide the answers. So some of these I think I've already addressed. Why are the roads so bumpy? Again, we're exploring some things to smooth out the roads in the interim until the final pavement gets put down. How long will this reconstruction take? Again, the phase 3 is going to last from April through November of this year, and then the phase 4, the surface improvements, will be through the end of summer of 2014. So that's the time frame for the reconstruction of the infrastructure. What is the safety history of the bump outs? These have bump outs or curb extensions have been utilized in many different cities and towns across the country for the past 25, 30 years, if not longer. They are safe by their very nature. That's what they're designed for, is to slow traffic down. But we can gather some specific data. There's AASHTO and some other folks have data. We'll ask our engineer to pull some of that data together, and we can share it with the folks back on the Rebuild Crestmore website. So we'll get some of that information out to the public. Where can we see both the bump outs and the roundabouts? Again, I'll ask BKF, our engineer, to give us some locations over here on the peninsula where they are constructed so that people can both see them and drive through them.
Excuse me, can we have them just spray painted around the side of
Yeah.
all the curbs?
Yeah, actually.
That would definitely help us out a lot.
Yeah, no, that's a great idea. Actually had discussion with our engineers about that earlier this week, probably based on your discussion. Yeah.
And he definitely helped us, but we'd like to do it on all the corners.
Yeah, absolutely. We can go out there and spray paint those, have the surveyor mark them and paint them so that we can see exactly what they're going to look like.
Thank you.
Yeah, essentially what it is, it's moving the curb out to that location and narrowing up the intersection. So if you can see in these drawings here, this is a curb with landscape behind it. So it's essentially between 4 and 6 inches above the pavement.
Is that a bump out?
That's essentially a mid-block bump out.
Okay, so where would the original sidewalk be?
So here's a good example of one of those intersections. So here is the existing sidewalk back here, and then this represents this line right here, would be this outer line here. So essentially what you're doing is bumping the curb out, extending the curb out, and narrowing the intersection so that people don't go rushing to that intersection. They come up to that intersection, and it's wide enough for 2 cars to pass, 24 foot, 2 wide lanes, but it still has the perception for the driver of narrowing that intersection so that he has to slow down, he or she has to slow down to get through that intersection. Yes. Yeah.
Parking, and you also get somebody trying to go very fast, they bump up on the curb on the opposite side of where they're going and intentionally get out.
Yeah. Well, again, I know the parking is a concern, but the other thing to remember is that these are really right on what we call the curb return, the round part. So no one should really be parking there anyway. Yes, actually, that was one of the first things we did, was sit down with the fire department and talk about these in terms of the turning radius of their trucks, and that will be accommodated. So the sidewalks, the question is, are the sidewalks going to be widened? In what's currently proposed is on what I call the wide streets, and maybe I should go to the overall map to explain what I mean by that. So there's certain streets within the neighborhood that are wider than others. In particular, Glenview from San Bruno Avenue up to Claremont, all of Claremont, and all of Plymouth. Those streets are wide, wider than the remaining streets. So one of the things that we have to do as part of the reconstruction is if we're going to rebuild the sidewalk, we have to rebuild it back to meet ADA, the Americans with Disability Act requirements. The driveways that are out there right now do not meet current ADA standards. They were designed and constructed back in the late 50s and early 60s. So in order to rebuild the sidewalk to meet ADA standards and not create a big ramp for cars, what we're proposing to do is two things. One, essentially raise the street up, or if you can visualize it, shorten the curb height from its current 6-inch design to 4 inches. What that allows us to do, and I'm getting very technical here, is to shallow the ramp of the driveway approach. On the wide streets, we have the opportunity to move the curb 1 foot into the street on each side. So when we do that, it's going to shallow that driveway approach even more, make it less steep, and yes, the sidewalk will be widened on those streets, but it won't be widened into your yard. The back of sidewalk will stay exactly where it is. We'll have 1 extra foot of sidewalk into the street. And again, those streets are very wide. They have plenty of parking. They're wider than a current city standard street, so the extra foot on each side can easily be accommodated.
That's going to narrow the street. Can we get like a yellow line down the middle, or yellow speed bumps?
Well, typically in residential neighborhoods, you don't stripe down the middle, but that's something that we'll have our engineer take a look at, and we'll get back to you on that. Next question is why has PG not completed the filling of the pipe? I think I've addressed that. The canyon behind our house and drainage ditch has been compromised by the explosion, such as gopher investigations, cracks, etc. Will the city step up and rectify this problem? So one of the things I failed to mention earlier in part of my presentation as part of the next phase of work is we are going to be obviously impacting each individual resident with a new sewer lateral and a new water service. As part of that, Joan, can you raise your hand, Joan? Joan in the back of the room, maybe stand up. Joan Zerot is one of our construction inspectors, and she's helping oversee not only construction but the design interface for this next phase of work. If Joan hasn't already, Joan will be knocking on your door and talking to you about the sewer laterals and the water services. As part of that, she's also going to ask if she can go into your backyard to see if you have a V-ditch or a concrete drainage ditch. What we're trying to accomplish is to get an inventory of where all the drainage ditches are in the entire neighborhood. When the subdivision was built, there wasn't good records that were kept. We know that over time people have filled in those ditches or taken them out. So we need to see where the ditches are, where there's pieces missing, and then ascertain what is a good solution globally to deal with this drainage situation. One thing to keep in mind is that these drainage ditches are all on private property. They're not city utilities. They're privately owned V-ditches.
But law requires you not to bring water from one neighbor to the next, and then the guy on the down receives all of that water. And
Why don't you use the microphone right there? Could you repeat that on the microphone there? Thank you.
Property, you know, there's a ditch behind all the houses on our block, all the way up from Concord up to where that dead end is up there. At the bottom of that ditch is a drain, and the drain is behind my house. And the city does not come out there and clean it, and I'm the one that's like the gatekeeper for that drain, you know what I mean? And I feel that I don't own a drain, you know what I mean? That's a city drain. You can't say that there's a drainage system and that's private. You know, it's not private. I don't own a drain, you know?
Well, the drainage connection of those V-ditches into the city storm drain system, that will be fixed as part of this project.
We had an earthquake, supposedly, on your website there. It lasted, I believe it was 45 minutes. It was not quite 4, but almost 4, 3 point something. For an average earthquake, 15, 20 seconds, maybe 30 seconds is a big one. We had one for 45 minutes. You know what I mean? What damage has been done to that hillside, and what, you know, what is the city gonna do about it, you know?
Yeah, well, I think we're mixing a couple of different issues here, but in terms of the drainage ditches, like I said, the first step is to go out and let's do an inventory of where they are and what condition they are in, and then we can take the next step and decide how it is we're going to address that. So that's, yeah.
Gophers, and there are plentiful. And let me tell you, I have pictures of coyotes, pictures of bobcats preying on the gophers, trying to get them. And I have mounds and mounds. And what I'm really concerned about is the integrity of the canyon. It's your canyon and it's my canyon. I guess we own 20 feet beyond our
15.
house, or 15 feet. The city owns the rest. And with the rains and such, you know, it's a real big concern.
In that main section of Concord and Claremont, that goes right down in this gopher infested area with the potential of it breaking, you know, it's.
I have pictures of bobcats. We have wildlife coming from Crystal Springs that has never been there before because of the plentiful of the rats and gophers and stuff.
Well, in that particular area, we have a geotechnical engineer as part of the project. I know that he has looked at some issues close by there. We can certainly have them go out and take a look at that area. Sure. Next question is, a street light is needed on Concord's and Claremont's dead-end street. So as part of the street light design, we hire a consultant that does photometrics. And photometrics is where they do a study, show where the new street lights are going to be, and what sort of light is thrown off. Actually, they do maps showing where the light contours are. That'll be done, and as part of that, you know, we'll certainly look at that location, and I'm sure that that area will be much. Right. Right. Okay. Who will be responsible for taking care of the trees and vegetation in the proposed bump outs, and how often will maintenance be provided? So the city will be responsible. The Parks and Rec staff will be responsible for the maintenance of landscaping, just like they are citywide. I think that something that we've talked about is, and need to explore further, is, you know, the potential of, you know, utilizing some of the funds via the trust to perform some of that maintenance. There's obviously legal and policy issues involved with that, but you know, that's something that I think is you know, worth exploring. Beyond the park and canyon replanting efforts, are there plans to rebuild the trails in Crestmore Canyon? If not, how can that be done? So overall, project costs that we've identified within the neighborhood are somewhere in the order of around $25 million in additional soft cost, staff time, other reimbursements to the city, adding on to that, doesn't equal the full $50 million. There has been some, consideration of what other potential projects could be constructed. This is one of the item that I think is in the mix, is some sort of trail system within the canyon. It's part of the general plan. The plan is for us to take an item to the city council in a future study session to talk about this project and some other potential projects that could be funded via the trust. Why would they propose bump outs, let alone roundabouts, in such a confined area? Bump outs on some streets are accidents waiting to happen. Again, the traffic circles and the bulb outs have been proven to control speeds and actually lessen accidents. But like I said before, we'll dig up some accident data and provide that on our website. That was it for these questions. Any other additional questions?
And Terry, you talked a little bit about the condition of the streets, and that the response to it seemed a little bit vague as to what might be considered. I know that it's been very important to this community to have something done temporarily to get the streets to a place where we can at least drive over them in a way where we're not jostled about. In normal circumstances, it would not make sense to tear up streets, pave them and tear them up again, but these are pretty extraordinary circumstances, and I think this community would appreciate maybe going the extra mile and spending that money to get something repaired on the streets in a temporary way.
So I'm going to butt in here and answer instead of Harry, because I think that Harry articulated the answer, but it wasn't it obviously didn't go as far as you would like. We have a program of improvements that Harry is authorized to carry out, and there is an approximate. I had asked Harry to give me a ballpark back of the envelope estimate of what it would take to do a what we call a slurry seal coating on the streets that are currently impacted, and then to with the intent then of coming back. That would not be the final treatment, but it would provide a temporary improvement, I think, along the lines of what you're talking about. He told me that's an approximate $200,000 improvement. We don't have authority at this moment to tell you that that will be done. We will be bringing that forward to the City Council and recommending that that be considered as a desirable temporary improvement, because we agree with you that there is a unsettledness about the way that the neighborhood is left, and we are working through these issues. I hate to say it, much in the same way you are. We've never done this before, and so when we scope and strategize about what would be the right way to prepare for and deliver a project of the scope and magnitude that we are attempting to deliver and you are experiencing, we're learning as we go along as well. And so what seemed like a good idea at the time is no longer such a good idea, to let you sit with those streets for another year and a half.
This is, you present it to the City Council, you request this of the City Council?
We request authority to
do that,
work.
and then you have to submit that invoice, if it's done, to PG&E for reimbursement.
Well, it's not actually to PG&E, but the city fronts the money for the cost of the improvements, and then we seek reimbursement through a trustee
from the trust, okay,
who is assigned to write the checks out of the trust.
Do you have an approximate time frame for something like that?
Okay, so I think that you've answered.
Well, unfortunately, given the dollar amount, it's something that we would have to publicly bid. We couldn't just call up a contractor and say, hey, can you go out and pave this for us? You know, we're talking about a fairly significant dollar amount. And actually, just to clarify, one of the things Connie said, we explored both slurry sealing as well as doing a thin overlay, and actually it was a thin overlay that we think will stand up better. The slurry sealing is probably not a good solution, and that's the $200,000 project. And again, it's not for all of the roads out there; it's just for the worst roads. The other option that we can explore is, and my engineer will cringe when I say this, is potentially we have to get city council authority, but we could at least put it in the bid that's about to go out and get a bid price for it, so that once that work starts, we can make that the first item of work, and in the interim go to the council and get authorization to proceed with that work. So that's something that we can certainly consider. And if we do that, then that means that construction would start in April, mid-April or so. But regardless, we have to go through a public bid process, and even an expedited bid process with just the paving, we're probably looking at maybe shaving 2 or 3 weeks off that time frame, unfortunately.
How come the contractors can't do a better job of patching? Yeah, I mean, they're getting paid for it. So when they come, why can't they do a first-class job in the first place instead of having to go back and do it over again? You know?
No, that's a very...
Put the base rock, put the asphalt, do it right the first time, you know?
No, that's a very good question. The way that the project was bid and constructed is there's individual trenches. So they dig the trench, backfill the trench, and then just pave that trench. So what we have is we have some fairly good paving on top of the trench, but then we've got the old paving beside it that, you know, has been through a lot. And so you've got good paving, bad paving, good paving right beside each other, and it's, you know, originally the idea was we're going to come in behind this fairly quickly and repave everything, but, you know, in hindsight, that was probably not the best strategy. Okay, any other questions?
New homes in the empty lots holding up construction in any way? Meaning that you're going to be bringing in construction equipment to build those homes? Is there any worry about messing up the new streets and what have you in the sidewalks?
No. Again, I think the original thinking was that you know, if we can get most of those homes in the rebuilding process while we're doing the infrastructure, that is ideal. But even if those lots are constructed after we do our final lift of paving, the construction traffic related to home construction isn't as great as obviously big, heavy road construction. So we don't anticipate that that should or will be an issue. I'm going to...
No, there isn't. There are no restrictions that the city legally can impose. I would venture to say that PG&E is highly sensitive to the perceptions of the community and the interests of the city as your representatives. So that will be a topic of discussion with PG&E as we go forward to clearly understand that.
Okay, are there any other questions this evening? As I said, this is new for us too, but we're with you all along the way, have been and will continue to be. So if you have any questions that you think of in the next week, 2 or month or so, don't hesitate to get a hold of us. We will always answer them, and if we don't have the answers right away, we'll get them for you. And we will be having the not-for-profit discussion to set that up, and we want to expedite that if we can on February 5th right here at the Senior Center. And of course, we'll be having some more of these updated meetings as we go forward. So I thank you very much for coming this evening. It's wet out there, it's cold, and I really appreciate it, and God bless you all. Thank you.